Hey, what's up, TikTok? I was trying to go live earlier, but I don't know what the heck happened. So, anyway, I am here because there was a very important survey done asking people about the terms Hispanic, Latino, Latinx, and 57% said that they didn't care about those terms, which goes to show the whole point that those terms are futile, that those terms are meaningless when it comes to describing who we are. You know, and it's interesting because I guess on Twitter people are going crazy talking about it. I honestly haven't had time to check it out, but I'm glad people are talking about it. You know, I'm glad people are talking about it. And I wanted to just talk about it because I was like, exactly, right? 56 or 57% said that they didn't care about the terms because the terms they don't serve any purpose, you know. And like I've always said, beyond them being completely European, Hispanic is from Spaniard, Latinos are the Southern Europeans. Later, they used it to try to say, oh, Latin Americans. It doesn't matter. It comes from Latin from Latium, Rome. We have nothing to do with that. And then Latinx is the same thing as the Romanian one with an X, which I get that are people that are trying to be gender, non-gender binary. But the reality is that colonial terms will never do justice to us as a people, right? Never. So I don't agree with Latine, Latinx, Latina, Latino, like anything, whatever ending it has, it's not going to change the fact that it's a genocidal term, right? That completely erases Indigenous and Native folks. So I'm not going to argue with that because that's not the purpose of it, right? And Latino has had different historical waves of importance and relevancy. And first and foremost, like I said, it's about Roman language. We're not Romans, right? We're not Southern Europeans. And then the third wave of it is that in the 70s, a group of Cuban American executives used and created this term to create a marketing scheme to exploit the majority of the population that they had no affiliation with, right? I think they make up like about 3% of the so-called Latinos. So they were trying to lobby for grants, trying to lobby for this marketing project that they had. And who are the ones that are being exploited by these terms? It's us, the majority of us. The majority of us that make up the so-called term Latino are actually of Mexican descent, right? Second to Mexican is Central American, and then I believe we have South American. So the demographic exploitation of the term is clearly, it's historically documented. There was no shame about it. You can research this yourself. There's a lot of books that have been written on how these terms were manufactured. They don't give the colonial perspective that I'm bringing up, but it is already there, right? Cuban Americans who can no longer exploit people in Cuba that left Cuba under Fidel, they were wealthy Cubans, white wealthy Cubans, who a lot of them received a lot of instant citizenship and a lot of other perks for coming to the US. And so they gained a lot of economic power that way. And to sustain it, it was like, how do we market all these bunch of people with one idea, with one identity? And that's what they did. Did it work? Did they even get the grants that they used it for? I don't know. But the point is that it was done as a way to exploit other people. And, for the last 24 years, I have been saying this with a lot of other people, that we as Indigenous folks, and that's what I'm talking about, there are definitely white European, Southern European Latinos. Yes, go ahead, by all means. But I'm talking about that these identities, these are colonial identities that are given to describe the majority of indigenous people by colonial markers. The fact that a lot of us speak Spanish has nothing to do with our heritage and we love this so much. It's a colonial process. It's a market, the concept of Latino, it's a colonial term to describe a colonial experience that we're still colonized with. And like, I'm speaking in English. Does that mean I am Britannic? And every person of color that speaks English, are they automatically Britannic because they're speaking English? And is there a Britannic community? And the Britannic community comprised of everyone who comes from English speaking countries who speak English? No, it does not. It does not happen that way. So why does it happen that way with Spanish-speaking people of color? Well, because there's a very intentional, marketable aspect of these terms, right? Sorry, I could go on. The advice on ways on empowering teens and tweens to become activists, feminists. You know what? Thank you. Great question. Right now, with social media, the fact that pandemic is happening, the fact that, social distancing is still a thing, use your voice on social media. Use your voice on social media. Use your platform. Write letters, write emails. There's a lot of things you can do in the digital age right now to be an activist. Right? And activism looks different for everybody, right? Some people want to write letters. Some people want to do protest, picket signs. Right now with social media, this is a great way to resist. This is a great way to protest. So like I said, becoming an activist. And as far as feminists, I don't identify with feminists, but I understand what you're saying. As far as being a woman or a self-identified femme in activist circles, I would just say you have to be very assertive and make sure that machismo is not present in the organizing that you're doing, because like I've experienced firsthand, a lot of times machismo is so embedded in how people function and how they relate to gender relations that it trickles over into activism. And it's really sad because that demoralizes, that makes a lot of women, femmes, actually give up on activism because they're tired of that crap that continues to happen. But as far as advice, educate yourself, research this information, spread the information, talk to your community, talk to your parents about it, talk to your families about it, use social media. You can create a TikTok, you can create a YouTube channel, you can do your own research. Like I tell people, I am a historian, I am an activist, but I tell people by all means, and you see this on my YouTube videos, by all means, I am presenting the information I know thus far. Information is always changing. Research is always providing new sources. So like I tell people, there's stuff I did when I was, in the early 2000s that I don't stand by today because I know more now. I've changed my perspective, but that's the thing. That's how knowledge works. Knowledge is something that should be transforming. It's not going to be an absolute truth forever. Some things change with research, with technology. Like, for example, in archaeology, with the science of radiocarbon dating, now they're able to actually pinpoint as best as they can an actual date for when an artifact was found, right? And that's new. That wasn't around before. So it's like there's all these tools that people have that can really help us, and so an advice would be research, educate yourself, use your platform, whatever platforms you have, to create resistance, right? To speak your mind, to share the knowledge, to share the message of whatever issues that you are about. Because believe it or not, social media, as far as the power that it has, a lot of people look at social media to see where things are going, right? They want to see what's the hot topic. They want to see what people are talking about. And the accessibility of social media is really important because people all over the world have access to these platforms. I had issues with social media, and I still do, because of the data engineers, and I don't like the fact that they own a lot of our content that we create, which I do not like that, and the fact that they get all of our information. But as far as the exposure, as far as the access that you have to people, this is it, right? Like my little sisters are the ones that convinced me to get on TikTok, because they were like, sis, like that's where everyone's at, like that's where you gotta be. And I was like, I thought about it because I was already like, fuck, like I'm on Facebook, I'm on YouTube, and I don't know, I just thought it was gonna be way more complicated. And honestly, I've been really enjoying TikTok. So shout out to my sisters for inspiring me and pushing me to come out here on TikTok. And honestly, like the fact that we have 1 minute or 3 minutes to say what we gotta say, share what we gotta share, and how creative it is. So I hope that answers your question. I know it has a lot. What's up, Santiism? What's up, EF Dog 5280? What's up, NYUQRI? So yeah, so I was trying to come out here earlier, but it was some weird ass game on here that I'm like, I ain't about to do this. But anyway, is the septum new? No, I've actually had it for a while. A cousin of mine gifted it to me. I have a few, I just don't always wear them because my baby, you know, he like yanks it, and I would hate for him to yank it off my nose. So yes, so just to let you know, there was a survey today. Santiism, thank you. Everything's good. Great day, great productive day. Working on my classes, which I love to do. I wanted to share, and I guess people were telling me, you know, Twitter is talking about Latinx and why Latinx and not Latinx. And so one of my mentors sent me some articles about all these people are questioning, right? Like the importance of Latinx or Latino or Hispanic. And I'm telling you, it's a hot topic because it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't work. It doesn't, you know, like people say, oh, the Latino community. Like, what is the Latino community? People that speak Spanish, people that come from countries that were colonized by Spanish-speaking Europeans. Like, I don't buy it. I do not buy it. It doesn't make sense. What does a white Argentinian have in common with the indigenous person from Guatemala? Or what does a white Cuban have in common with an indigenous person from, you know, Mexico City, from Oaxaca? It's like, it's a false illusion, and it plays into the homogenization of our people. We're not homogenous people, you know? I remember your story on Insta saying how white ate up Latinx, so it means it's not challenging white super. Exactly. Yeah, thank you, Santiism. So yeah, I did a post on Instagram saying that Latinx was incorporated into the Merriam-Webster's dictionary in 2018, and in 2018, it's like, okay, how quick was the term accepted into the mainstream? That shows you it's not threatening anything. It's just like, oh, sure, add an X. Sure, let's add an X to it. It doesn't change the fact that it's genocidal. It doesn't change the fact that it erases all of us. It erases black. It erases brown. It erases indigenous. It erases anybody who is not European. And like I said again, these terms centralize whiteness. So whether you add an X, an E, an O, an A, an S, it does not matter. It is a European concept that centralizes whiteness and does not honor our complex realities and identities. That's just word up. That's just the truth. We're not monolith. Exactly. It's a monolithic term, right? It's like, oh, you have a Spanish surname, Latina. Oh, you speak Spanish, Latina. And it's like, no, it doesn't work for English speaking people of color. Why is it working for us? Because it's a very intentional term. So again, the different waves of this term that have been used, it's been in big ways. If you look at the historical etymology of Latino, it's Southern Europeans. It has to do with Romans. We have nothing to do with Romans. The fact that we were colonized by Spanish speaking Europeans, yeah, they want us to use that as a point of celebration and pride. Tells you, it's very telling of how they want us to view ourselves and what identities they want us to empower ourselves with. Let me move because my back is hurting. Okay. Whew, my back. So anyway, that's the whole issue. And people say, oh, well, it's just a term, doesn't matter. Yes, it does matter. Power, it's distributed in the way that they identify bodies. How are our bodies as indigenous folks read by the system of colonization? It is read by these terms that erase us, that completely disconnect us from who we are, and they try, and it gives power to Eurocentricity, the white narrative, that everyone is just going to be European, we're out towards the white future, and it's bogus. Sorry, I'm going to read some of the comments. We're not a monolith. That's right, Veronica. Social work sucks. It always rubs me the wrong way, too, when you demographics stating specifically things like Hispanic or Latino, not Hispanic or Latino, as some, yeah. And Gen Z is going hard for Latinx. And you know what? Latinx, from what I've seen it, people in our community don't know what the hell it is, which is another thing that the survey pointed out, that people, the older generation, non-college educated, they have never heard of Latinx. It's a very, exclusive term being promoted by academia that is completely disconnected from the community. So the fact that not everybody in our Spanish speaking communities, like even that, like they don't know what that is. Like if I tell my tia, oh, Latinx, she's like, what the hell is that? So it's like there's so many layers to why it's wrong. And this is nothing against our communities of non-gender binary folks, of our two-spirit folks. This has nothing to do with it. As you're decolonizing and you're studying different indigenous societies, you'll know that gender binary was not something that was used to oppress our two-spirit, relatives or non-gender or fluid relatives. Like this is a completely European mindset that's really embedded in the Roman Catholic, view of the world that criminalizes certain sexual identities and activities and behaviors. Like that's where that mindset comes from. So when you're decolonizing and deconstructing these ideas, they're not found in indigenous societies. These whole norms of judgment, of claiming that things are better, this hierarchical thinking, it's a very European trademark of European culture. I heard somewhere that the term Latino was created for profit. Yeah, I mean, I have it on my page here. I have tons of posts that I share with y'all, that the modern way that we know Latino today, it was by Cuban American executives, media executives, that were not connected to the population, right? At that time in the 70s and 80s, Mexicans were the majority of what they were soon be called Latinos. So they couldn't connect with these populations, and they had the money, right? They had the money, they wanted grants, so they tried to force this identity on everyone. So when they received funds, who benefited? They did, because they were the ones calling the shots. They were the ones organizing this. It had nothing to do with us. So the fact that governments and Black indigenous people of color are the ones that are running with these terms tells you a lot about what their intention is. It's not about celebrating and honoring us. It's about centralizing whiteness. It is about erasing Black indigenous people of color. It is about buying into the narrative that white cultural markers are what should be definitive of our bodies and our experiences. Again, these terms are saying that white European cultural markers should be definitive of our experience. What that means is Spanish language, Spanish surnames, to them are seen as the epitome of culture and should define who we are. When you look in your history and you decolonize your history, you'll know that the process of how we went from speaking so many different indigenous languages, the majority of us, because a lot of us still speak our original languages, it was a colonial process. It wasn't like, oh, Spaniards are here, let's have an exchange, teach me your language, I'll learn mine. No, it wasn't like that at all. It was a process of genocide. It was a process of persecution. It was a process of killing what is it called? Kill the Indian, save the man. It's like that policy has been around since 1492. So yeah, the terms Hispanic, Latino are colonial. And for people to say, oh, so what do we do? What do we use instead of Latino? There is nothing to use instead of Latino. You know, if you know your pueblo that you're from, if you know your tribe, your nation, if you know, like, claim it. If you want to say Mexican, if you want to say Puerto Rican, if you want to say Bolivian, if you want to say Peruano, like, there's all these different identities that don't come from that, right? So I tell people, if you know your tribe or nation, assert it, right? Reclaim it, embrace it, empower it. Because if not, these terms are empowering white supremacy. They're empowering white narratives and the erasure of who we are as Indigenous folks. As if you can be Hispanic, Latino plus other. I heard somewhere, let me see. Yep. Yes, it was. Yes, it was. Latino was created by Cuban, specifically Cuban executives, media executives in the 70s. And if you look at my videos on my TikTok, I have so many videos where I show you the books that you could read that from. I show you different examples. There's a video where I do 5 reasons why we are not Latino, Latinx. So check it out. And then no one wants to acknowledge that Latino means European. Exactly. It's like, why are we taking that for granted? Like, the concept, it's European. It carries that baggage of Eurocentricity. And yet we are thrown these terms expecting us to submit to European culture, right? And what does that tell you about what their intentions are with us? It's not about honoring who we are. It's not about honoring our ancestors' languages, our people's languages today. None of that, right? Why did Europeans do all that? Like, there is a, you know what? In my classes, I talk about that. Why did Europeans do all that? Sister girl, they've been on this journey of Inquisition since like 1095. That's the year, 1095. And the Pope created papal bulls that gave them access to claim lands, to enslave people openly, deliberately, all with the blessings of the Catholic Church. This goes way back. This goes way back to 1452, I believe, when they created the first papal bulls, which were religious decrees that were given to these so-called explorers. So wherever they went on this world, they could claim it for Jesus Christ. And this is where it begins. They could not stay in Europe because Europe was not that nice, and they had a lot of issues in their own land, and they wanted to compete with the Islamic imperialists that were also out there navigating the world. There's a lot of history to that. Actually, I get into that in my classes that I'm teaching, decolonial history of the Americas, and I'm gonna start my class with that. Right? It's the first one. Yeah, the first one. So it's like, what led up to the European invasion? What was happening in Europe that they felt that they were entitled to our land? And there's a whole moral justification going on in their psyche and their land. So there is a lot of history that we are not taught about what made them invade us and how they viewed us when they landed in what is called San Salvador, which is where Columbus landed in 1492, which is in the Bahamas. They can't really pinpoint what island it was, but he named it San Salvador. And so, anyway, yeah, there's a lot to learn about that. Yeah, our people have been fighting these terms since, from what I have found, the 80s. I think it was the 80s, early 80s. Yes, there is a poster. I think I have also shared it. Somebody in the protest saying we're not Hispanic. Not Latino yet, because Latino wasn't in mass use yet. But for sure, our people have been protesting these terms for a long time. It's not new. Chicano's problematic too, just asking Indigenous people. Let's see. I'm reading the comments. Academia plays a major role in creation and acceptance of racial. Yeah, yeah. Seriously, the term Latinx, it's a total academia based, concept. It's like our people in the community, they don't really know what the heck that means, right? Like, and honestly, even the term Latino, when you are in the community, say you go to a kermes or something, like people don't say, oh, Latinos, like they say, oh, Salvador, or que viva, even, and if you're all from the same country, they'll start, naming some states. So it's like this whole concept about Latino, it's a mainstream term that completely dilutes all of our diversity and our complexity. So it's like, no, 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 no. Like, it's not working and we shouldn't accept it. It's being pushed on us by people that ain't from us, right? They have no connection to who we are, and they're not asking our permission to be labeled this. They think that in their intellectual, whatever elitism, that they get to name us, and that's not right. It's like, you need to ask the community what we think, and we in the social media, all of us that are making all these videos here, we're letting you know, no, we are not Latino, we are not Hispanic, any of that, right? Yeah, and as far as reconnecting, absolutely, absolutely. Um, we have to do it respectfully. We have to do it respectfully. You can't just go start claiming different tribes and nations without any like knowledge or even contact or any type of relationship. So absolutely, like I tell people, if you don't know your tribe or nation, you could just say, I'm a reconnecting native, I'm a reconnecting indigenous person. Because even the term indigenous, and you'll get to this if you go to some of the conferences in Mexico, like even some of our people that we consider indigenous, they don't know what the term indigenous is. They don't identify themselves as indigenous. So even indigenous is like, I tell people, you can use that as a placeholder until you find where your great grandparents were from, right? It's like, yeah, even our people that we would consider indigenous, a lot of them are like, what is indigenous? I'm not indigenous. Like, that has nothing to do with my reality. So there's so many layers to this, right? So that's why, yeah, definitely do it respectfully. Make sure that you're not just taking on nations and claiming all this nations and tribes. Like, oh yeah, absolutely, we have to be respectful. um Yeah, and if we can, the Chicano movement, there's so much to talk about that. There's so much. Again, I always say, our people in the 70s and 80s, their information was limited, right? Just like a lot of things we know today, a lot of our people didn't know back in the 70s and 80s, right? So like the poem Yo Soy Joaquin, it's very Europeanized. It's focusing on Yo Soy Cortez, Yo Soy Cuauhtemoc. Like, yes, today is problematic as fuck, but back then, that's what they knew. That's what they connected with, right? And so nowadays, it's like, no, now that there's new information, we have the responsibility of continuously educating ourselves and making sure that we don't continue to bring back those lies. And a lot of people are so set in their ways that they don't want to continue learning, and that's really sad. It's really sad. Exactly. It lives in academic spaces, not in the fields or ghettos. Exactly. Right? Like I tell my people, if you know your pueblo, represent your pueblo, your municipio, like your rancho, whatever it is. We do not need another homogenous term to, replace the homogenous term Latino or Latinx. Like, it doesn't work like that. It's easy for them as marketers and people that are seeking to profit from our community when we say, oh, all of us are this. Here you go. That's the label you can call us from, exploit us. It's not like that, right? Because in the marketing, for those of you who are into marketing and all that, like, they spent millions of dollars trying to study different populations to see what products they consume, how they think, how they view consumer culture. So it's like, they need to invest. If they want to get to us and our population, they need to invest. They need to know who we are. They need to respect our diversity, and they need to respect our different identities. We're not going to just chop ourselves down and manufacture ourselves into a product for them and facilitate it and make it easy for them to continue to exploit us. No, that's not the purpose. The whole purpose is that we are not European identities because we speak European languages that were forced on our people through a colonial experience. That is the bottom line. It's not hard, right? It's not hard. But all these corporations and even in academia, they force people to use Latinx. They force you, if you're applying for a grant, they force you to use Latinx. Why? Because they think that that's the politically correct term, that's the term that people want to use. So they force you into using categories that the people, like someone said on here, from the hood, like, we don't use those terms. It's like, who are they trying to impress? Each other? Like, it's not about us. It's about them. It's a conversation that they're having laterally, and they're not looking at our community. They're not asking for our permission. They're not asking us to say, oh, what do you want? Let's take a vote on this. They don't care, right? They don't care. It's like, no, these are European words from a European language that centralize European identities and a European worldview. Right? And if you look at the historical indigenous perspective of this, it's like using these terms give power to occupation and give power to being connected to Europe in some way, shape, or form. We are disconnecting ourselves from our roots, from our heritage, and are being forced into these identities. Why? Because the whole colonial powers, they want us to connect to Europe. They want us to connect to white supremacy, because meanwhile we connect to white supremacy and we connect to Europe, right? It takes us away from reconnecting to our land, which is Abya Yala, which is the Western Hemisphere, which is this continent that we're on today, right? So the more we identify with Europe, the less we identify with who we are, and the less of a threat we are to these colonies that have taken over Abya Yala. And that's the straight truth. That is the straight facts. That is exactly what is happening. And if you look at our population, we are the majority. We're in some regions, we're going to be the majority in 50 years. And it's like, why do we need these terms? We don't need them. We have enough beautiful cultures. We have languages. We have so many beautiful aspects of who we are and our complexities that we do not need them. We don't need their language. We don't need these terms. We don't need these so-called protocols. They need us. They need us to function. They need us to stay in power. They need us for them to continue thriving, right? So, and that's why I tell people, there's millions of us that don't know this history. Millions of us that are never presented an alternative, because why? Mainstream media is governed by all these terms, is governed by white supremacy. So it's really, really important that all of you watching, continue to resist this, create videos about this, talk to your friends and family about this. We need to boycott these terms and say, no, I'm not Latinx, I'm not Latina, I'm not Hispanic, and say what you are. You don't have to create another homogenous term that doesn't do justice to any of this. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm like, there's all these comments coming in, I'm trying to read them. Yep. And like, I did a video on my TikTok, like, who are the people that run Spanish speaking media? They're white Spanish speaking Europeans, like, straight up. That's who it is. And it's like, talk about equity, right? When we talk about equity, it's like, why are all, if you look at the racism of Spanish speaking media, you all have seen it. Where's the equity there? The majority of us don't look like that. The majority of us are not blue-eyed, blonde, these people that come out, and the ones that are the cleaners, the servientas, the janitors are all like dark skin, Mexican, Central American, South American. It's like, no, where's the equity here? Why, if you want my money, why don't you look like me? Why don't you put people that look like me in right, respectful places? So look at the executive board from Univision and Telemundo, and yes, their novelas come from Mexico. And yes, who governs Mexico? criollos. Mexico is still not free, it's still not independent, much like many other countries and those colonies are not independent. The criollos, the Europeans, never left. The power structure, the oligarchy, the families that continue to maintain the wealth of Mexico is still there. It hasn't been dismantled. It hasn't been dissolved. So they called it Mexico. They sprinkled the Mexica eagle on there and called it Mexico. And like if we were supposed to believe that, and it's not true. It is not true. Feel like I'm in class right now taking notes. Well, I do have a class. I have oh yeah, I'm sorry, let me go back. Yes, I still have spaces in my Saturday class. It's called Decolonial History of the Americas, quote unquote. You can still register for that. I still have some spaces available. Classes start Saturday, September 4. And you can send the payment through Venmo, Zelle, PayPal. Just hit me up with my PayPal email and Cash App. So definitely, it's a 6-week course that I'm teaching. And this is all we're going to be talking about. I just want to say thank you because of you. I did get a DNA test. I hope. Awesome, Jose. Awesome. Let me know how it goes. Let me know how it goes. And also, don't forget on AncestryDNA.com, you can search for your relatives. Like, it's crazy. I came across my great-grandparents' marriage certificate. I mean, well, it's not like a certificate, but it's like the records. It's amazing. It's amazing what you find on AncestryDNA.com. It's an absolutely, you could create an account for free and you have access to all of these records. Like, it's amazing. As a historian, that's what I do. I look at records all day and archives. So to be able to look at something that comes from my family, it's like, whoa, amazing. What about our children? If we're mixed, can they still claim Mexican? You know, like I always say, they can. I mean, if they're mixed, you could say biracial, you could say bi-ethnic, you can claim both. Like, you know, I'm not here to tell people, oh, you can't do this, can't do that. I'm just telling colonizers, hey, colonizer, we're not you. Just because you made us speak like you doesn't make me you, right? So that's the message. We are not the colonizer. Hello, hello. Do I support land back? Yes, I do support land back movements. But there's a lot of them. There's a lot of land back movements. Yeah, and this is the thing. A lot of people need to understand that in the 90s and in the early 2000s, people didn't know much besides the Aztec. That's all people knew. Aztec, Aztec, Aztec. That's what I knew. Mexica, Aztec, Mexica, Aztec. So back in the day, that's all we knew. Now, I want to say like within the last 20 years, the information, the archaeological, anthropological information, research on the rest of the indigenous populations of Mexico and so-called Mesoamerica, it's a lot more. So you are all getting great access to research, knowledge, anthropology, archaeology. It's amazing. It's amazing. So Mexica, which is the actual term, it's not Aztec. Aztec was given by a European later on. But the Mexica, right, which are there were the 7th group. This is what people don't know. This was the 7th group, okay? There were 7 migrations into the Valley of Mexico, right? Those that we know as the Aztec were the 7th migration into the Valley of Mexico. So before the so-called Aztec, there were 6 other migrations that came from the north to the south. So that tells you our interconnectedness as a continent, right? There was massive migrations north and south. The so-called Aztec that we know as Aztec today were actually Mexica, and they were the 7th migration, the 7th massive movement of migrants who came into the Valley of Mexico, which is amazing. And you'll see that there's a lot more history to where this came from. So they were the last of those migrants. There's so much history before the so-called Mexica. The Mexica Empire began, they founded their city of Mexico Tenochtitlan in 1325, okay? In 1325 is when they founded Mexico Tenochtitlan. That's very, very recent. They were invaded in 1519, right? So that's 200 years of being in existence. The Mexica, the so-called Aztec civilization, right? And in my class, I have a lot more new research to why that narrative existed for so long as far as the Mexica. Congratulations on becoming a mother. Thank you so much, Yesenia. Thank you, thank you. It's been an amazing experience. I am like beyond grateful. My baby boy just turned 6 months, and I'm just like, oh my goodness, this is amazing. Like, amazing to have a child. And oh, it's so beautiful. It's so beautiful. Thank you so much. And shout out to all the parents out there. Shout out, shout out. Do you have any tips for reconnecting? First and foremost, what I'll say this is, if you have your grandparents, your great grandparents, some of us still have them, some of us know them. If you have elders in your family, ask them questions, right? I would say ask for names, ask for date of birth, ask for the cities or towns they were born in, because when you're looking for records, those are the questions they ask you: the name, the date of birth, what cities they were born in, right? And it's very interesting because we have to remember, in those detribalized areas, in those disconnected areas, about 3 or 4 generations ago, that population is, well, I'm talking about Mexico, right? Like in the 1800s, that we're looking at the connection of the Mexican government sending out all these policies, all these city workers, right, to get indigenous populations to stop speaking their native language. And so there was this pressure for indigenous communities to stop being indigenous, right? It was considered something backward. It was considered something that was uncivilized. And so if you match the policies of Mexico to when in your family the language was last spoken, like in the native language, you'll see that there's a connection. There's a connection between the time that those policies were enacted and when your last ancestor in your family tree last spoke an indigenous language. For example, my great great grandfather from my mom's dad's dad yeah, was the last to speak Nahuatl. Okay, he was the last to speak Nahuatl, and this would have been late 1800s. And so you want to look at that. You want to look at the oral traditions in your family, and you'll see that in our families, we're not used to talking about this. We're not used to talking about where was so and so born, where was so and so born. I was very lucky enough to interview my grandmother 2 years before she passed, and interviewed her on her experiences growing up, the names of her grandparents, the names of her great grandparents, you know. And it was a beautiful recording that I did an interview of her, and it's a beautiful recording. You know, it's something that I will always cherish, but it's also part of me documenting my own history. Because remember, even thinking about history and thinking about lineage and thinking about all these things, it's a privilege to a lot of us. Our ancestors, our immediate ancestors, our parents, our grandparents, they didn't have this privilege. You know, the work, the poverty that was created by all of these, you know, international corporations like NAFTA and all this, like, it doesn't leave you much time to think beyond your lifetime or think back beyond your lifetime. So this in itself is a privilege that a lot of our abuelos didn't get to experience, right? So we have to be very mindful of that. So when I was asking my grandma questions, when I was sharing it with my family, they were like, oh shit, like, we've never thought about that. We've never questioned it. We've never asked like more information about our ancestors, about our abuelos, abuelas. And that's something that hopefully our generation, you know, we're able to do and start gathering that information. Because it's like, yes, there are some digitized archives, but like I have also learned, some records were actually destroyed by, for example, the Cristeros. And this was interesting to me. I just learned this, right? One of my aunts pointed it out to me. She said, yeah, there's some records that we will never get access to, because this is recent. This was within the last 100 years, right? That during the Cristero Wars of Mexico, they were going town to town, especially in the western states. They were going town to town burning down the records office, right? Because of the issues that they have with each other. So that's crazy. So not only do we have to look at records that exist, but we have to also be mindful of how all these contemporary wars that happened also damaged a lot of those archives. So it's crazy to acknowledge all these layers of erasure, right? It's crazy. Exactly. I love how you share your knowledge. Thank you so much. Okay, I'm reading comments, reading comments, reading comments. Tu luna llena, hey sis. Yep, colorism, that's for sure. The public educational system has brainwashed. Yep, absolutely. The most recent example of what you're saying to show Netflix con todos los criollos. Yes, I think it's called Made in Mexico. I think that's what you're talking about, Tu Luna Llena, if I'm not mistaken. Oh my goodness, yes. And if you go on YouTube, because I have a YouTube channel, and check it out when you get a chance. If you go on YouTube, you're gonna see that there's this thing called whites again, and they actually take pride in this. They're like, no todos los mexicanos somos morenos, estamos nosotros, and they're like screaming, like they're victimizing themselves. Like, oh, we're not all dark brown. Look at us. We're the white Mexicans. Like, this is legit what they're claiming, right? And you could look this up on YouTube. It's there. They have like all these YouTube channels about saying, oh, yes, so we're not all brown. Look at us, right? It's crazy to me. Like, they don't get it. Like, oh my goodness. It's crazy. Blood quantum. Well, blood quantum, I think, has different layers of it. I am not too familiar with the Native American experience and how that was used, but I will say that in Mexico, the idea of sangre pura, right, sangre limpia, is when the whole term of the castas existed. It had a lot to do with blood quantum. They didn't call it blood quantum, but it's an idea that came from Spain, from Europe culture, to say that si eres de sangre pura, si eres de sangre liviana, si eres de sangre, it meant the more classier you were, the more appropriate you were. And so that the class issue of blood of Spain trickled over into race when the whole start of the casta system began. And there's actually a really good article, I don't remember off the top of my head, but it talks about that, about it. And even this, right, if you talk about, you're familiar with a lot of Mexicans who say that, it's like, oh, it is the sangre liviana, oh, is it sangre azul, oh, is it, like, the reference to blood as a key factor on your quality as a person, or the characteristics that you carry as a person, is connected to the casta system. But even further than the casta system, it's the way that they viewed blood in Spain. I haven't seen too much about other countries, but in Spain it was like sangre pura, sangre limpia, right? La sangre limpia, and then that became the closest you were to white were your pure blood, your clean blood, right? And if you had any mixture with black or brown, then your blood was stained. It's crazy. Like, these are actual thoughts. These are actual, constructs of Spain. And there's a really, really good, she was a Mexican historian who wrote an article on that. Next time I do a live, I will try to bring on all the articles that I recommend so that you can all read on this whole concept of blood, purity, cleanliness, and classism. And it's all intertwined in how the concept of blood and sangre pura, right, it started converting itself. It's kind of like eugenics, like the earliest starts of eugenics in Spain. Yes, that I am familiar with. That some tribes, but I think that's tribal. Certain tribes recognize the blood quantum in certain ways, and there's a lot of natives who talk about that in TikTok. So I don't know much about that, but definitely look up blood quantum on TikTok, and there's a lot of folks from tribal communities who can explain that. As far as the tribal card, and some tribes I think have different policies for how they look at blood quantum. But the majority of the ones that I've talked to, they don't believe in blood quantum. They think that that's a colonizer tool. And it's also very interesting because, not to discredit a lot of people, but a lot of white folks will say, oh, well, I'm 1/16th Cherokee, or I'm 1/28th Cherokee. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's, no. The way that they flip it, when it's a white narrative, it's very exploitive. So we have to look at that. It's crazy. Yep. So yeah, so next live I'm gonna do, I'm gonna bring some reading material so that you can see some of these articles. And these are great articles, by the way. There's great research being done right now in Mexico about all this, right? I think what happened last year really kind of exposed a lot of this, the work that has been happening, but it got a lot more exposure because of all this, especially now with critical race theory. There's like this panic, right? Oh my God, critical race theory. Honestly, critical race theory, all it does is show how power works in the United States. It's like, it's a racialized hierarchy, right? And racialized hierarchies lead up to institutions that want to sustain that racialized hierarchy, which is white supremacy. It's like, it's nothing out of this world. But there was somebody on here on TikTok that showed that a lot of people that are against critical race theory or actually afraid of, like, oh, Mexicans are gonna take back their land and this is gonna become Aztec, and like there's all these crazy ideas that colonizers have when it comes to that. But anyway, we could talk about that another way. Oh, one thing I will tell you though, one thing I will say, this is new knowledge for me, okay? I always wondered, why is it that there are so many Nahuatl words in the Spanish that we speak as Mexicans, Central Americans? Like, a lot of us use a lot of Nahuatl in the Spanish that we speak, right? And it wasn't until last year when I heard Federico Navarrete, which is a Mexican historian. He said that in the 1800s, he said that when Mexico became so-called independent in 1821, that they could have easily had used Nahuatl as the national language at that time, because so many Mexicans were speaking an indigenous language, and Nahuatl was a predominant language at that time. That detail of knowledge was expanded a few months ago when I was talking to Gui from SpeakNahuatl.com, and he introduced me to Yasnaya, which is a Miche indigenous woman who is a linguist, and then talking about how in Mexico in the 1800s, about 70, some say 70 to 80% of Mexicans were still speaking an indigenous language. Can you believe that? That's not even 200 years ago. And I was like, no shit, like that makes total sense. Like, we haven't been speaking Spanish for 500 years as I thought. That's how I had understood history, and I was really totally wrong, right? So we have actually been speaking Spanish for about 200 years, right? So it's like, it's amazing. That in itself tells you so much about the power of indigenous resistance and languages. Again, in Mexico, in the 1800s, the majority of Mexicans were speaking an indigenous language. Not Spanish, okay? Not English, an indigenous language. That was 200 years ago, right? And now they're trying to force this national language of Spanish, which is ridiculous. But that just tells you, though, right? Because honestly, I thought, oh, Spanish invaded, they forced on Spanish language, and we've been speaking Spanish in the majority since the 1500s. But it's not like that. It's not like that. Exactly. There are so many Mexicans today that don't speak Spanish. Exactly. And if you look on YouTube, I love YouTube. There's so much free resources on that, right? Talking about a lot of, like, the people in Mexico City, right? They're trilingual. A lot of them speak an indigenous language, and they speak Spanish, and then they speak another language. So it's like, yes, there's Mexicans that don't speak Spanish. Exactly. And Spanish has been used as what? As the gauge of civilization. And it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous when they push that, right? That agenda. So that blew my mind. I mean, I knew that we were speaking some Nahuatl words in the Spanish that we spoke, but I did not know that we fairly recently started speaking Spanish in the majority, right? And this is, I'm talking about Mexico as a whole, right? Mexico as a whole. Yes, there are communities that speak no Spanish at all, have not been, disrupted with Spanish. Absolutely. So, okay, I have a few more minutes and I had to get back to my baby, but I've loved this live. Thank you for your questions and your comments. We're all learning here. Like I've said, I've been doing this for 24 years and I'm still like amazed at some new information that I'm finding out. So, be patient with yourselves. Like there's just so much, like I said, 24 years, but for the last 2 years I'm like, what the heck, like I didn't know that, I didn't know this, I didn't know this. And it's so exciting. It's so exciting because just like I exist and I'm very passionate about defending our history and our heritage, I know there's millions of us out there, right? And there's those of you out there who are doing what you are doing to bring visibility to our issues and our communities. So thank you so much for joining me in tonight's live. Next live, I will make sure to bring some reading material. So make sure that you grab a pen and a notepad for our next live, because especially the question about the blood, I'm really thankful that you asked that, because there's a lot of talk and there was a lot of points of reference of la limpieza de sangre in Spain, and trickled over into the casta system, which trickled over into eugenics, which trickled over into today, right? So anyway, thank you so much, everybody. Have a beautiful night. Thank you for tuning in. Don't forget to check out my YouTube channel and follow me on Instagram, Mexican Excellence. And I still have some spots available for my Saturday class. If you are interested, it's for all ages, for all educational backgrounds. You don't have to even have attended high school or college, none of that, right? If you are under 18, I do need your parent permission, though. It is, I do need your parents' permission, but it is for all ages and all educational backgrounds. So anyway, have a beautiful night. Thank you so much for joining me in tonight's class. It felt like, hopefully y'all learned something and I'm learning from you all. So gracias. Buenas noches. Ay, good night.